that's the very interesting thing about podcasting is nothing is really concrete. You can change your intro, you can change your outro, you can change your trailer, you can change the name, you can change the artwork, you can change the YouTube artwork, you can change everything. You can change the category, you can change the description. You can go from 1 episode a week to 2, or you can go from 2 to 1. That is the beauty of it. You can change everything. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode number 96, Why You Shouldn't Quit Your Job to Podcast Quite Yet. Today, for episode number 97, which categories are the most saturated? So there's a reason I want to do this episode. And the main reason is I've realized that one of the reasons it's easier, potentially, to grow shows that are very niched, very specific, is because the categories that those shows are in are not nearly as saturated. There's not as much competition. So let's think of it this way. Would it be easier to start a regular gym, just like every other gym, just like Planet Fitness, 24-Hour Fitness, LA Fitness, whatever it is, Lifetime Fitness? Or would it be easier to start a very unique type of gym, let's say maybe a hot yoga studio? Now, hot yoga studios are becoming more and more common, but here's the thought behind that. Yes, there are a lot more people probably that go to a regular gym to exercise than go to hot yoga, but the competition is also way more. Could you start a burger restaurant? Yes, but the competition is much higher than, let's say, if you were to start, I don't know, a healthy smoothie store. The competition is much smaller. Is the segment of people, is the demand smaller? Yes, but ultimately you might be able to get a bigger piece of the pie. You may be able to get more clients, more customers than you would if you went the mom and pop route, the mom and pop gym, the regular burger stand, whatever it is. This is something that I think a lot of us, and I was very guilty of this in the beginning, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing to think this way, but the thought is, well, I'm going to go into the biggest category because the biggest category has the most amount of people, therefore, I'll have the biggest listenership. But if we're talking from the perspective of getting on the top charts in Apple, it's going to be really hard to do that depending on what your category is. So just as an example, we have a client that started with us, I think she's on her 37th episode, something like that. And she has been on the top charts since she launched her podcast. I think right now she's number 40. And her podcast is in the category of running. There aren't a ton of shows in the category of running. That's one of the reasons, that's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons she is charting, because the competition just isn't as much. Now, does that mean she's getting 100,000 listens per episode? No, because that's not the amount of demand that category has. So what I really want to get to land today for episode number 97 is, let's say you have a podcast, and I'll go through some stats too. So stick around because I have some actual stats and I'll make sure I tell you where you can find them. They're a little older, but they still serve the purpose. If you have let's say you have a podcast that is about business, there are subcategories of business. And they're not, and this is the weird thing, and this is why podcast land is kind of the Wild West at times, not every category has subcategories. So let's just say, okay, as an example of the client I was using, I believe it is exercise, and then under exercise, there is a subcategory of running. So there is an actual category, genre, segment called running. Now, how many shows are in there? I could look and find out, depending on the stats that we have in front of us. But when I was reading into this, when I was researching to do this episode, one of the things that made me laugh was, I'm pretty sure there's only like 198 shows on rugby. So if you start a show and it's about rugby and you put yourself in the rugby genre, you'll be on the top 200 charts right away because there's only 199 shows. That's the stat I read. I don't know if that's true now or not, but you can think about it. If you wanted to start a top 200 podcast, you could just go to the segment that is the smallest, the genre that has the least amount of competition, and launch your show. Now you can say you have a top 200 podcast. Is that what's best for listeners? I don't know. It depends. Depends on a lot of different things. So here's my thought. If you have a show that is, let's say it's in health. Under health, there are a lot of other subcategories. Let's say you have a show like ours where it's about self-improvement, it's about mental health, that type of direction. You're going to probably want to pick the genre as your main category. So here's where things can get a little wonky. Apple, I believe Apple, when you pick a category, the first category you pick is the one that matters most for Apple. Not every directory is that way, but I believe Apple is going to prioritize you in that way. So if you pick mental health, it's going to put you there. That's going to be the main place. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is behind the scenes and it isn't really public how that works. But we use Buzzsprout as a host. And when you're setting up your profile and you're picking your category, it says, actually, let me just go to it right now. And again, I'm not sponsored by or affiliated with Buzzsprout or anything like that. We've just been using it for a long time, and I enjoy the platform. All right, so when I go to podcast info, and it says Apple Podcasts only uses the first category. Other directories may use the additional categories. So right now, we are education is our main category, and then self-improvement is our subcategory. Health and fitness is our secondary, and then the subcategory is mental health, and then the third one is education, how-to. So it might be worth, and again, I don't know if this is what we're going to do or not. I don't know if it's worth it, but what I could do is I could put our first category, how-to, because our podcast is how to improve physical, mental, emotional health, all that happy jazz. That's something I could do as a test to see what happens. Well, what if instead of being in the top 100 for self-improvement, we're in the top 20 for how-to? Does that actually pay off more? I don't know. We'd have to see. We'd have to test that. But ultimately, the lesson for today's episode is make sure you're putting yourself in the category that's going to give you the highest opportunity for success. The running podcast I talked about earlier, this person is really good. She's a really, really, really good coach. She is very, very well educated, and she has a lot of credentials. She's won awards of best in the world at this. So obviously that plays into it, right? That's a big piece of it. But if there's only 2,000 shows in that category, and 50% of those, 60% of those right off the bat haven't produced an episode in the last week, you're already creating more of an opportunity for you to get there. So just make sure you choose the right category. Under education, there's a bunch of different ones. Under health and fitness, there's a bunch of different ones. How does your podcast cross over into a couple different ones that you might be able to leverage? This podcast you're listening to right now is in how-to. It's under education how-to, because when I was looking, I didn't think there was a better one. Yeah, I could put it in business. Yeah, I could put it in society and culture. I could put it in a lot of different ones. For me, that's what made the most sense. And I do believe that's one of the reasons this show is already a top 100 show. A lot of it has to do with the category. I don't know if other people are going to tell you that, because I think maybe maybe you lose credibility. I don't know. But I want you to win, so I am going to tell you that. All right. So this data is coming from pacific-content.com/the most crowded categories in Apple Podcasts. This is as of April 2021. I couldn't find as deep of data that was more recent. So we're going to go with this. Does it mean everything's exactly the same? No, but I think it's a really good place to go off.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tarryn McCarthy, and I'm host of the Business of Happiness podcast. When I met Kevin and Alan 2 years ago, I had no idea of how much impact they would have not only on the success for my business, but also on my life. They've given me enormous perspective and true strategies, true tactics to take in my everyday business plan and in my life plan to make an even greater success. Kevin and Alan, thank you so much. I couldn't even begin to express my gratitude for all you've done for me. And if you're looking for similar mentorship, I highly recommend these incredible experts at the Next Level University.
So, as of 2021, education was the top spot in terms of the most saturated podcast category. And education had 213,558 podcasts. Now, that doesn't mean all of these are producing consistent episodes. It doesn't mean any of that. But then we can look and maybe I don't know, can you link websites? Yeah, I'm going to link this. I'll link this in the show notes. Let me just make a note of that because I think it would be really cool for everybody to be able to go click on it. And when you click on it, it's like I don't even know how to explain it. It's this wheel that when you click on it, it expands and then you can see what's in the wheel. It's really cool. It's a really cool graphic. But in the subcategory of self-improvement, under education, there's 82,715 shows. And then there's, under courses, there's only 28,847. And then under how-to, there's 13,143. So this podcast you're listening to is in a category with 13,143 other shows, again, as of 2021. And that obviously is going to lend to me getting on the charts faster than if I went in self-improvement that has 5 times that, 6 times that. So where are you? Are you in a very, very saturated genre? Some of us, that just is what it is. If you're in comedy, there are. Yeah, okay. So if you're in comedy, there's 118,227 podcasts. Out of those, 74,435 are not in a subcategory. So they're just comedy. But then you have improv, which is 20,751. Then you have comedy interviews, which is 17,795. And then you have this really, really small segment that is category comedy, subcategory stand-up that has 5,246 podcasts. If I was a comedian, I would put my podcast probably there to see what happened. Because that's not that many shows. You might end up on the top charts. And what the top charts ultimately do is when somebody goes into comedy, and they go into stand-up, and they look at the charts, you're going to be there. So anybody who does that to find their podcast, you're going to have the opportunity to connect with. All right. So I don't want to bore everybody with numbers, but let me just go through the main ones. So the way this wheel is set up is, and maybe you're looking at it right now because you opened it while you're listening to this episode, it has an inner circle and it has an outer circle. The inner circle is the main ones. And I think there's probably, I don't know, like 15 or 20 of them. I'm not going to give the specific number. I'll just give kind of like a rounded number. Okay. Education, 213,000. Society and culture, 213,000. Arts, 158,000. Religion and spirituality, 152,000. Business, 149,000. Comedy, 118,000. Health and fitness, 95,000. Leisure, 81,000. Music, 81,000. News, 72,000. TV and film, 45,000. Kids and family, 33,000. Technology, 31,000. Science is 31,000. History is 28,000. Fiction, 22,000. Sports, 20,000. Pretty much 21,000. And again, do I think that's where it is right now? No. But if we think about how much it's grown, it still is probably the same level of saturation compared to the other ones, because in theory, they'll all grow or shrink to the same effect. Maybe I'm making that up. I don't think so. But government, 10,000. And then we have true crime. Yeah, see, this is how I don't really believe this anymore. True crime is 6,876. So those are all of the main categories as of 2021. I'm sure there's probably more now and they've changed. But the lesson, the through line of this remains the same, where just make sure you're in the right one. I'm genuinely thinking to myself, maybe I will take Next Level You, which has been a top 100 podcast in many, many different countries under self-improvement and under mental health. If I put that in how to, I'm willing to bet we'd probably be on the top charts right now. Being on the top charts means there's a bigger opportunity for organic growth, organic exposure, for people to find you by accident. That might be worth trying. Same for you. If you're a comedy podcast, try it and see what happens. A lot of the data that I've read and the advice that I've read suggests that you should probably go into the least crowded of your specific genre because you have the highest opportunity to be seen. That's the thought. Now, yeah, if you're in one of the big categories and you're on the top 100, I wouldn't necessarily worry about it because you're already charting where, if you're let's say you're a number 99 in education, I wouldn't go switch to something else so you can be number 70, because the 99 is probably going to feed you more than the 70 of a smaller one. Just something to think about. But I think it's worth a try, potentially, especially in the beginning, to see what happens. You never know. Getting on the top of the charts, I don't want to say it's easier and it's getting easier and easier, because that's not true. But if you pick your category correctly, it's easier than if you don't pick your category correctly. And I know you might be thinking, Kev, obviously, that's obvious. Trust me, I've worked with a lot of people who didn't even know what category they were in. And the one that it sets you up with, if you don't choose one, I think is arts. So there's a lot of people probably in the arts category that doesn't even know they're in the arts category. So make sure you're in the right category. Choose the right category that's going to give you the best opportunity for growth. And hopefully I don't have to say category any more times in this episode. I think that's it. Let me just quickly look. Yeah, I would say that's really all we need to talk about. Yeah, that's what I would say. And don't be afraid to change it. You can always change it and see what happens. Nothing. That's the very interesting thing about podcasting, is nothing is really concrete. You can change your intro, you can change your outro, you can change your trailer, you can change the name, you can change the artwork, you can change the YouTube artwork, you can change everything. You can change the category, you can change the description. You can go from one episode a week to 2, or you can go from 2 to 1. That is the beauty of it. You can change everything. So it might be worth trying. Now, I don't know how long it takes between when you change from one category to another before you're seen in that category. That might be as quick as a 24-hour thing, like most Apple. And again, we're speaking on this episode specifically about Apple, right? But it usually says changes could take 24 to 48 hours on Apple. I know some people deal with that. For me, it's always been pretty quick, an hour or 2. And then they probably would need X amount of data before you'd end up on the charts. So again, it's hard to tell, because some people say the guess is it's every 48 hours. Other people say it's every 2 weeks when they pull the data. So I'm not sure exactly what that number is yet. So I would probably give it a month to see what happens. But yeah, it's worth a try. And I might be trying it too. I might try it for NLU just to see what happens. What if we're in the top 20? How does that help? So it might be something worth trying. And here's the other thing too. You might get exposure to a new audience. So by doing that, you might get exposure to a new audience in a new way that's never heard of you, versus maybe the people who look at the top other charts have seen you before and they decided you weren't for them. So it also is the opportunity to get exposure to a completely new potential demographic. So that's another benefit. All right. I have a bunch of these lined up over the next, well, I won't say over the next couple weeks because my wife and I are going to Scotland in 2 weeks, but I have a bunch of podcast breakthrough sessions when I come back. If you have been waiting to book one, if you're nervous, if you feel like you aren't ready, you're too new, your show's too small, whatever it is, I promise you, none of that is true. I've done podcast breakthrough sessions with people who don't even have podcasts yet. So it doesn't really matter where you are. More than anything, if you have the desire to grow and learn, then it's going to be wonderful. So link will be in the show notes. As always, I would love to chat with you and add any value I can. Next week, for episode number 98, what makes good cover art? This is a mistake that I see very, very often where somebody, going back to what we were just talking about, they get their cover art made in the very beginning of their show and they just never change it. And it never gets upgraded and it just doesn't represent who they are. And it doesn't build trust and it doesn't build credibility. And people just don't click and they don't give you an opportunity. They don't give you a chance. So we're going to talk about that next week. What makes good cover art? As always, I hope your podcast is crushing. I hope you're in the right category. I hope your technology is cooperating. You're feeling more comfortable in front of the mic, more comfortable in front of the camera. I hope your lighting is working. I hope your guests are getting back to you and sharing your content that you provide for them. And I hope you're enjoying the process. And I hope you're getting some results that you desire. Until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and we will talk to you